Hello, class, and welcome to this week where we will be exploring the themes within existential psychology. So, if we're to think in terms of themes within existential psychology, we first off need to kind of recognize the melding of the different worlds that came together. Now, during the first half of the 20th century within psychology, psychologists were very much concerning themselves with specific problems, specific human problems. And psychology was interested in mental illness and finding various models for explaining mental illness. First off, the biological model, then the psychodynamic model, and then finally the behavioral model. But in the 1950s, several well-known psychologists, particularly people like Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, Rollo May, really challenged the idea that all behavior could be explained and treated using these old models. And they wanted to kind of recognize the humanness within psychology. And so they started to pull, first off, from their own principles of recapturing the humanity within psychology, but also pulling some ideas of existential philosophers. And so there we have what we sometimes call a humanistic psychology, which emphasizes self-acceptance and personal values and personal meaning and individual choice. But then we also have the existential psychology that emphasizes self-determination, choice, and individual responsibility. And so you could kind of say that there's a new model that kind of comes out of these two that we sometimes refer to as the humanistic existential model. And within this, there's a recognition that there are aspects of freedom of choice that empower individuals, that there is resiliency that resides within individuals, and that individuals have experiences that go beyond simple behavioral models or behavioral learning models and delve deeper into issues of meaning and value and choice. And so what I want to do today is explore some of those themes that we have within existential psychology and just get a bit of a flavor for the nature of this perspective of the existential within psychology. Now, there are a lot of different themes that come up in existential theory, and no one theorist holds all of these, but this is a smattering of what I have gleaned from the various philosophers and theologians and therapists as far as how to live life. Now, while being informed with the general view of existentialism, we need to kind of recognize that these are, they are part of who we all are, our subjective experience. And so the mnemonic that I like to use when I'm explaining these themes is Calm Spider-Man. And this mnemonic helps us to remember all the various parts. Now, because there is such a long list, and a long history in existentialism, I'm trying to kind of prim it down, make it a little bit simpler for us. Each one of these themes is important, and combined with every other thread throughout our tapestry of life, it really kind of weaves the whole fabric of our life. So it's important to ensure that all of these are there within our lives, and recognize that each one of these are supportive of our own lived experience. And so it's important, I think, to start with a recognition that we are our choices. So we start with the word choice. And we need to kind of remember that every moment in our experience is contingency, that we are free. So we can take a new direction. We must be mindful to do this in order to truly live life. And so we begin this theme with choice, we move through authenticity, love, mythopoeics, spirituality, passion, identity, death, embodiment, responsibility and relatedness, meaning, action, and we end with new directions. And so, in essence, we begin and end with choice in some way. So, let's begin exploring these themes within our lives. So, the first theme in life is choice. That is the C in the calm Spider-Man. Now, from the perspective of an existential therapist, the human capacity to will and to make choices is likely one of the most important aspects to understand. Our very being is choice. And it is exceedingly rare that we can say, I can't do it! And to have that be a true statement. More often, the true statement is, I choose not to do this. And then there is the therapeutic question that comes along with it. Why did you arrive at that choice? To look at choice is at the very core of what we call existential analysis, which can be a very valuable practice, not only in our own life and evaluating our own existence, but in helping a client as well. If I do not choose, then I do not really live. And I become who I am by the choices I make. If I make no choices, then I become nothingness. Choices give me power, for I cannot change the wind, but I can adjust my sail. In addition, it should never be, he makes me feel blank. He makes me feel sad. He makes me feel angry. A truer statement would be to say, I choose to allow him to control how I feel. And that helps us to recognize that even our emotions have choice attached to them. Growing up, we are not used to making choices. We are used to being told. And so most of us do not recognize the power of the choices that we have and have always had within our lives. So oftentimes moving out from home makes a crisis because we do not know how to choose. Choice is the key to life. So I want you to think, what are some choices that you made today? What was one choice of emotion that you made today? Or better yet, what have I chosen not to do with my life? Or who do I choose to give power to within my life? All good, valuable questions that each one of us needs to ask in our own personal existential analysis of our life. Because recognizing choice within life is a very essential part of recognizing a critical theme within existential psychology. The next letter in our mnemonic of Calm Spider-Man is A for authenticity. We need to be honest with ourselves. We need to not make excuses for ourselves, but recognize that we choose sometimes fail. We choose to give up, and sometimes we choose to revolt, and sometimes we choose to destroy. We need to be authentic beings. That means that we need to be honest to ourselves. We must honestly choose what it is that we want. Take control of our life, our attitudes, our actions, and even our emotions. And most importantly, not deceive ourselves. There's a wonderful theological principle for describing people from the Protestant Reformation, and it's simul justus et peccator, which essentially means we are simultaneously at the same time a saint, in that we are loved by God, and a sinner, someone that does bad things. And we need to recognize that we are valuable as beings, but at the same time, sometimes we're broken and self-deceiving. And so simply having the authenticity to recognize that we are those things can go a long ways to helping us gain power within our own life. When was the last time, for example, that we made excuses for ourselves when we chose to fail, or chose to give up, or chose to revolt, or chose to destroy? When did we do something bad, but told ourselves that we are okay, because at least I didn't do this? Oftentimes, in fact, we tend to be very hard on other people when we see them do something wrong, because it makes us feel better about ourselves. And it's really simply a form of inauthenticity, because we're deceiving ourselves. Rather, we should recognize that we too are, or have the potential to be, in that situation that other person was in. And if we simply understood that person better, we would empathize with them, and rather than attack or find joy in sharing the gossip of their story. So the first theme, choice. The second theme, authenticity. The third theme, love. Love is one of those things that we rarely talk about, but is one of the most important things in our existence. So I want you to think, what is your experience of being loved? There's many different types of love. There is a manic love, where you are playing and having fun and being full of energy. There is the ludic love, where you are being a little bit racy and dirty. There is the erotic love, the touching and sensuality of love. There is the philia love, which is the love of a friend. There is storge love, which is the love of a mother for a child, that caring, nurturing love. There is agape love, that undeserving kind of love. What is your experience of love, and how do you show love to others? What is your love language? All of these things, extremely important, but very oftentimes you don't hear anyone talking about love as part of the human experience. And yet it is so very central, and existential philosophers and psychologists recognize love is at the heart of everything we do, in the many ways that we do it. And we need to recognize that it is so very important within our lives. And then to round out the first word in our mnemonic column, Spider-Man, we have mythopoeics. What is mythopoeics? Mythopoeics is we are creating stories. Literally, mythos is stories, and poic or poet is creating. We are mythopoeic beings, in essence. We are creating stories as we live our lives in the world. And the world is made of stories, and those stories make up our worldview within which we live. And we have a responsibility to know these stories and to adjust the stories to support life as best as possible. We heard stories growing up. We will share stories as we live through life, and there will be stories about us afterwards. And so we need to recognize that stories are a guide, but they can also be a limitation. And we need to recognize them as such and use stories properly. Remember that stories are in support of life, not more important than life. So, what are some of your stories? Stories like, where do I come from? Where do I fit in? Where am I going? And so, in living your life, explore some ways that you can support the mythopoeics of being human. So, for example, what do I do to support and create culture and cultural stories? What do I do to create stories in religion, for example? Organized religion. In the Jewish tradition, there's what is known as the mezuzah, which just is basically, literally is a doorpost, but it's also a piece of parchment. And this mezuzah is something that is recognized within the Jewish community as hearing. It's a call to hear the stories, essentially. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And that little phrase, that little decorative case, that verse, is a call to hear stories. And that is something that we all need to recognize within life. It doesn't need to be a religious thing, but the reality that we are mythopoeic beings is very important. And that should be part of our life, and we should find a way to make that part of our life. So that is the calm. We have the choices and authenticity and love and mythopoeics, and then we come to the S for spirituality. Everyone has a spirituality, because spirituality is the way that we relate to the world. It's the way that we relate to others, to whom we hold ourselves accountable, and how we make meaning. It is a large nexus of things within the world and defines how we deal with so much of life. One does not need to be religious, but religion does profoundly inform spirituality with a wisdom and a tradition of the ages that is otherwise lacking within a person's life. But it can also sometimes be toxic, and we need to recognize that. And so there always, of course, needs to be critical thinking in conjunction with spirituality. But in living a human life and living a meaningful life, spirituality is well recognized by the existential philosophers and psychologists as a valuable part of life for building resiliency, for building responsibility, for helping people to live life. So answer some basic questions about your own life as you evaluate your spirituality. What do you trust in? To whom are you accountable to? What are some guides within your life? What are some guideposts within your life to help you to recognize what is important within life? What is the community that you belong to, and what are the values of that community? Do you support or hinder those values? And finally, what are some symbols that are important to you? And all of those, I think, will help you to find your way in recognizing the importance of spirituality. Then there is the theme of passion. And passion isn't what sometimes we think. We think of passion sometimes as a type of love, but passion is literally suffering. So it's answering that question within our life: what moves us forward in life? What are we willing to suffer for? What are the things within our life that we are willing to expend our life for? Is it money? Or is it something higher? Is it something more important? And here's the thing and the rub. There's always going to be passion in life. There's always going to be suffering in life. But recognizing that you can choose suffering and expend yourself for something changes that suffering from suffering as a negative to passion as a positive within life. And so there is that question that each of us needs to ask within life. What is my passion? In other words, what am I literally willing to suffer for and expend myself for? Then there is identity. Identity is something that we work very hard to develop because it gives us a sense of who we are. And it relieves some of that death anxiety that we often face within life. It tells us who we are, how we belong, and what we are to do. It is a blessing and it is a curse. An identity that is too rigid may be strong, but if it is pressured, it may break, and then we are without an identity. One that is too weak or not clearly defined leaves a person floundering. The best thing is to spend time in your life picking, choosing, deliberating, and defining who I am. And in that way, you will achieve an identity that will survive the storms of life. It is something that a career identity can never do. And so I encourage you to never get caught in that trap of identifying yourself with your career. That is always a trap within life. It can be part of your identity, but never your full identity. But for some people, they die shortly after retiring because they've lost their identity and have nothing to live for. So it's always a danger. What is your identity now? Whatever it is, it'll likely transition. And here's a few identity statuses that we will normally go through in that time period between 16 and 25. Guaranteed you will struggle with this. And so this is something that's very important, and maybe I should give it a little bit more time for it. One identity status is identity diffusion, where you feel that sense of unease because you don't know who you are. But the problem is, if you dull that feeling of who you are with drugs or substances or with distractions in some way, then you will find yourself in identity diffusion. And identity diffusion means that you will feel a sense of unease within life, but also that you will likely not be very resilient. Then there is identity moratorium, where you try on an identity for a period of time. You change your style. You try on an identity of being a professional. You try on your identity of being a student. You try on different identities, but you don't really commit to any one of them. That is moratorium. Then there is identity foreclosure. Identity foreclosure is you are a student and you identify as a student, and then when you graduate you get a good job and you identify as your job, and that's who you are, and you let that define you. When you let external circumstances like that define you, you are in identity foreclosure. And it is useful sometimes to go into identity foreclosure at a young age, because it reduces your anxiety, makes you feel better about yourself and about life. But there is a danger, and the danger is that your identity is too fragile, too weak, and it's too dependent upon external forces. And so when you lose your job, you lose your career, you lose whatever relationship is holding yourself together, then your entire being falls apart. And then you're at risk. So identity foreclosure isn't that great either. What we want to do is reach identity achieved, but there's a trick. Identity achieved is something you cannot reach before the age of 40, really and truly. And so in order to reach identity achieved, first off, you need to move away from home and away from your parents. You need to be able to feel lonely for a period of time and work at building your own community. You need to make your own choices and your own commitments in life. And then as you pick and choose and struggle through many years of unease in the phase of identity moratorium, where you're adding and discarding different parts of who you are, you eventually find, after a decade or so of making commitments and caring for people, that you have reached identity achieved. And then, and only then, will you find a true resilience within your personality. So that is the goal, but not everybody reaches it. What I want you to do is just explore your own identity a little bit. Who am I? Who is it that I want to be? And go from there. And there's a wonderful little quote from Soren Kierkegaard, an existential philosopher. And he said, don't be a hero, be a saint. And what he meant by that was a hero is only a hero for a moment. But a saint is someone who chooses to do good each day and each moment. A hero lives in one moment and then the time passes. A saint chooses to live in the present and to do well. And I think that is a good guide for identity formation. The next one, as we move through this calm Spider-Man, is death. Because we all are going to die. And there is a very important psychological theory known as terror management theory, which basically says that to understand people, You need to understand that people recognize, whether consciously or subconsciously, that they are going to die. And so a lot of what they do within life, like building relationships, like trying to gain success, has nothing to do with success or relationships, but has to do with managing our own anxiety of our own death. And so what I want you to do is just kind of reflect on that a little bit and recognize that your own death is part of your own life experience, and that it is important to recognize that there is an end point within our life, and so that we can start to organize our life in a way that recognizes the importance and the value of things. There's an awareness that it all comes to an end, and so we only get one shot at this life. So we better be serious about living life and experiencing life and not missing out. That doesn't mean being reckless. That means being responsible. And so Irvin Yalom has the saying, death saves life. Why does death save life? Because it helps us to recognize that we have a limited amount of time, and that everything comes to an end. And in the end, we lose everything when we die. And so it can throw us into that question that there's no point in life. But perhaps it is simply recognizing that it makes the rest of life important. And so death becomes a very important theme within existential psychology. Then there is embodiment. And embodiment is part of that relational hub of who we are. In broad existential theory, that relational hub has to do with our connections with other people, our connections with our own body and our own mind. And that whole concept of embodiment experiences how we frame our relationships. And there's a wonderful philosopher by the name of Maurice Merleau-Ponty that really focuses in on the importance of our mindfulness of our embodied experience. And so he has a work known as the phenomenology of perception, where he explores where the ideas of our relatedness come from. They come from our embodied experience. And so we need to kind of recognize that our bodies are our relational being, and we need to honor that and understand how our bodies function in the world. We are relational. Our relational experience is bodily. We must be mindful of our bodily experience and how this will influence us. We interpret the existence of things by how they relate to my body. Now, you guys cannot see me, but I have a very unique relational experience when I relate to other people, because I am 2 meters tall, and let's just say I'm a big man, and I can scare people very easily, even though I don't intend to scare someone, simply by my physical presence. And so I need to be aware of that. And other people have their own subjective experience that is a part of their embodied self. And we all need to recognize, first off, what does my body want? What does my body like? What does my body need? And then, how can my body relate to the world around me? And when it comes to existential analysis, when it comes to working in therapy with someone, it's important to explore that kind of experience within life. So that's our embodied theme within existential psychology. Then there is responsibility. We must do what is responsible. And within existential philosophers, you will often hear that responsibility is a very important part of it. We are responsible for the care of others. We are responsible for the care of self. We are responsible for the care of the environment. Being relies on these things, so life demands that responsibility be part of living an authentic life. We know ourselves only in relationship with others, and so that relatedness and that responsibility are two themes that tie together under this R. What do you do with what you were given? And what meaning will you discover? That is the question that Viktor Frankl says is what life is asking of you. When we ask what is the meaning of life, we have it totally backwards. It is not for us to ask life of its meaning. It is our job, rather, to answer the question that life demands of us. What did you do with the life that you were given? And we have a lifetime to write our answer. So responsibility and relatedness, very important within existential psychology. Then we come to meaning. And meaning often is not what people expect. Meaning, in essence, within existential psychology is not a long explanation of existence. It is rather experiencing. Meaning is engaging. There is nothing better than enjoying the hand of your child and the labor of your day, according to Ecclesiastes or according to the Epic of Gilgamesh, if you recall from earlier within this course. Meaning is experienced in several very fundamental ways. In responsibility, in love. It is found in a task completed. Meaning is found in service to something or someone other than ourselves. Meaning is found in an experience, like walking down the street, or observing a sunrise, or in a piece of art experienced. Meaning is also found in an attitude that we take towards suffering. Meaning always turns into an objective answer, but only at the end of life. So we can only understand the meaning of our life at the end of our life as we reflect back, because meaning is something that is to be experienced rather than to be written out in words. So that brings us to the A within Calm Spider-Man. Because life is about relatedness and experiencing, and so there needs to be action. Living authentic lives does not mean sitting on the beach doing nothing. Living is about doing, engaging, interacting, loving, supporting, creating, experiencing. And what you do is your answer to life's ultimate question: what is the meaning of your life? So what is it that you do in small, everyday things? Because that is where meaning is experienced. And you might not like that answer, but it's the truth. And you will discover it to be true. Action. What do I do? When we engage, when we create, when we experience, when we interact, when we love, when we support, that are the places where meaning can be experienced, but it takes action. The A. And then finally we come to the end of that mnemonic, calm Spider-Man, with, again, new directions. Existence is about contingency. It is about opportunity. We don't know what's going to happen next. So we need to throw ourselves into the future and hope for the best. And that brings us back to choices. Every moment is an opportunity, so we can always take a new direction. Now, what new direction can you take to improve your answer to life's question? What is the meaning of your life? And there, I hope you see why Calm Spider-Man is such an important part of understanding how to live life. It's because within the themes of existential psychology, there is choice. There is authenticity. There is love. There is mythopoeics. There is spirituality. There is passion. There is identity. There is death. There is embodiment. There is responsibility and relatedness. There is meaning. There is action. And there are always new directions that are possible before us. I hope you enjoyed this class, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.